This is my aesthetic. Hello, welcome back to my poorly lit room. I've been talking about music of the 90s all year long, and this month in particular I've been talking about music that is my personal favorite stuff from the 90s. And I've been thinking about it and I realized that for the last couple of weeks I've been talking about bands like The Nation of Ulysses and Drive Like Jehu and calling them post-hardcore, but I haven't done a really good job of explaining what post-hardcore exactly means yet. And I was thinking of launching into a really in-depth explanation of that tonight, which would require me to go back through the history of hardcore punk itself. And then I realized that that would require going through the history of punk rock and new wave and how that's branched off into things like post-punk and noise rock that all got combined into post-hardcore. But I think it's probably easier to understand if I actually illustrate it with a couple of examples here. So I'm going to take a random hardcore punk band called Gorilla Biscuits, and I'm going to play you part of their song. So that clip gives you a pretty good idea of what your average hardcore punk track is going to sound like. There's going to be those fast galloping drums, those shouting vocals, and it's just really upbeat, energetic, angry, and driving style of music. So next, this is an example of a post-hardcore song, and it's by a band that many consider to be the quintessential post-hardcore group of the 90s, Quicksand. The two styles side by side like that, you can notice some really stark differences between them. The Quicksand song is a lot more groove oriented, it's a lot heavier, it's not as frenetic, and there's not so much focus on tempo as there is on just sheer power. It's almost like a calmer, mellower, but just as equally deadly form of hardcore punk, and just as effective. The crazy part is that both songs are actually written by the same person. That's right. Quicksand frontman, singer, and guitarist Walter Schreifels originally played in the band Gorilla Biscuits, as well as Youth of Today. And those were two hardcore punk bands out of the New York City hardcore scene of the late 80s. Before forming the band Quicksand with bassist Sergio Vega, drummer Alan Cage, and the guitarist with the exceptionally gangster name of Tom Capone. Their first release was a 4-track self-titled EP called Quicksand, which included the songs Unfulfilled and Omission, which would show up on their full-length debut album Slip later on. Slip was released on Polydor in 1993. It's one of those classic post-hardcore documents. So around this time in the early 90s, as we've probably mentioned before on this show, underground rock music was starting to come to the mainstream in a bigger way than it ever had before. There were a few other bands that were sort of playing around with sounds like these, trying to take the spirit and the attitude of that underground hardcore punk music, but update it with more diverse influences and make it not so much more of a uniform sound. Bands like Helmet and Fugazi and Jawbox were playing around with sort of similar styles at the time. Walter actually talks about being influenced by hip-hop. He says that the sound that he developed for Quicksand was an attempt to fuse hardcore punk with rap. On certain tracks, you can sort of see where they're coming from. You know, the rhythm section swings a lot more than on hardcore punk tracks, and there's a lot more of a bottom-end heavy bass presence. They use a lot of harmonic notes on their songs too. If you don't know what those are, that's when you kind of place your finger on the string of a guitar without pressing it all the way down to the frets and pick at the string, just kind of rake your pick across the string back and forth. You can hear it in songs like Transparent. Strike his last almost creates this effect of playing notes using feedback. The tracks are mostly all similar to each other, but they're all very good. Their songwriting skills are superb on this album. Each song has a pretty strong hook to it, and obviously has a really rock steady groove that runs throughout the entire song. My favorite moment is the middle section of the song Unfulfilled, track 7, where the song sort of breaks from its standard riff and goes into this good as Slip is, the band's second album, Manic Compression from 1995, might be almost just as good, if not better. This album was released on Island Records. This is one of the singles from it called Thorn in My Side. The band toured with a lot of more famous bands than them, such as Anthrax, White Zombie, Rage Against the Machine, The Offspring. But despite the support from the label and the constant touring they were doing, they never quite broke through to any mainstream success. And they ended up breaking up in 1995. Walter Schreifels formed the band Rival Schools, who released an album called United by Fate in 2001. They were more of an indie rock, alternative style band, a lot mellower than anything that they had done in his previous groups. The other members of the band joined Instruction, Deftones, Enemy, New Idea Society, and 108. In 2012, Quicksand actually reformed and played a bunch of shows together, started working on a new album, which was released in 2017 and was called Interiors. Even their reunion album is good. This band has never really put out a bad album. To this day, they are considered one of the most important and influential bands from their scene. Like groups like At the Drive-In, Thursday, My Chemical Romance. All of those bands were big fans, and you can hear it in their sound. And that was Quicksand, New York City post-hardcore at its finest. I'm Jacob, this was Rad 90s Music. I'll see you sometime in the future.